Hello guys, welcome back to my lesson. So today we're going to do human reproduction, and this topic requires you to label some parts, give functions for those parts, understand some processes, and then that's it. And this process carries a lot of marks. It carries a lot of marks. If you have to cram this topic, cram it. If you want to understand, but just make sure you know everything in this topic. So the first thing we're going to talk about a male reproductive system, where we'll be labeling, giving functions, talking about a process of spermatogenesis. And then we have female reproductive system, puberty. We'll talk about menstrual cycle and hormonal control at the same time because they work together. And then we'll talk about the development of the fetus. So first then let's look at the male reproductive system. We'll look at the testes first. This produces sperm cells and hormone testosterone. Remember the process of meiosis? We said that in males it takes place in the testes. So that process, it leads to formation of 4 daughter cells. Those 4 daughter cells they develop during the process of gametogenesis, and they form gametes. Those gametes are called sperm cells in males, right? And the process of gametogenesis in males, it's called spermatogenesis. And then the other function is the testes produce a hormone called testosterone. So we have epididymis. After those sperm cells are produced, they go to what? Epididymis. They are stored there, and then they mature. They will definitely ask you in your terminologies to say a part of the male reproductive system where sperm cells mature and they are stored. That is epididymis. And then we have the sperm duct. I'm skipping urethra because I want you to understand. We have sperm duct, which transports the sperm from the epididymis to the urethra. Now, before the sperm reaches the urethra, we have 3 glands. What happens? We have the prostate gland. What does it do? It produces alkaline fluid that neutralizes the acids produced in the vagina, and that would kill the sperm cells. So as semen it will have sperm. When it passes the urethra into the vagina, it would have a sperm, and then what? It would have that alkaline fluid that is produced by the prostate gland. Now, what does a corpus gland do? It produces mucus that helps with the movement of the sperm cells, meaning the semen would have that fluid produced by the prostate gland and the mucus that was produced by the corpus gland. And then we have the seminal vesicle. This one produces a nutrient-rich fluid that provides the energy for the sperm cells. So the semen will have liquids produced by prostate gland, seminal vesicle, and the corpus gland to the what? To the urethra, into the vagina. And then that semen will go into the what? The urethra. Urethra transport semen and urine out of the body. So that we have the scrotum lastly, which is a skin sac that protects the testes, that holds the testes outside the body at a temperature that is 2 degrees Celsius below 37 degrees Celsius. This is the best temperature for the production of sperm. So now let's look at that process of spermatogenesis. I told you it is a process whereby those 4 daughter cells produced during the process of meiosis, they develop to form gametes during the process of gametogenesis. Gametogenesis is spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Both of them are gametogenesis, but specifically in males, it's spermatogenesis. In females, it's oogenesis. So let's describe this process. You need to know this by heart. It will definitely be there in your question paper. Under the influence of testosterone, remember that the testes produces a hormone called testosterone. Under the influence of this hormone, diploid cells in the seminiferous tubules or testes undergo meiosis to form haploid sperm cells. You are done, and then you're going to get your full mark. Now let's look at the sperm that is produced in that male reproductive system. We have the structure of a human sperm here. Let's look at the parts. We have the acrosome, we have the nucleus, we have the neck, the head, the middle piece, we have the mitochondrion there, we have the tail. And then let's look at the functions that are important in this sperm. We have acrosome. They say that it contains enzyme to digest the wall of the egg cell for fertilization. The nucleus contains 23 chromosomes, right? The reason it contains 23 chromosomes for it to satisfy the doubling effect during fertilization. Remember, a gamete or a sperm would have 23, and then a female egg would have 23. When they fuse together, they will form a normal number of chromosomes in a human being, 46 chromosomes. The baby would have 46 chromosomes. We have the mitochondrion, which are mentioned in the part of a sperm. It provides energy for swimming. The tail is used for swimming. You need to know all these things. I cannot teach you things that are not going to be there in your exam paper. Now we have a female reproductive system. We have the fallopian tube. The first in fallopian tube, that's where the process of fertilization takes place. Now, they say that it connects the ovaries to the uterus, transports the egg cell from the ovary. It is the site of fertilization. That's where the egg and the sperm, they fuse together to form what? A zygote. And then we have the uterus. Carries the embryo and the fetus during pregnancy. We have the ovary. The ovary produces egg cells and secretes progesterone and estrogen. So in the ovaries, what happens is that process of meiosis, and then 4 daughter cells are formed. But then those 4 daughter cells, actually one daughter cell, it develops during the process of gametogenesis to form a gamete, an ovum. To form an ovum, and then that process specifically in females is oogenesis. And then that ovum will leave the ovary into the fallopian tube through the process of ovulation, right, to meet the sperm so that they can fuse together and form a zygote. And we have endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus, place where the embryo implants and the placenta forms. You need to know all these things. The vagina receives the penis and the semen during sexual intercourse. It is the passage through which the baby is born. The cervix, the lower and narrow part of the uterus, it stretches to allow the baby through during childbirth. So let's look at that process of oogenesis. We talked about spermatogenesis. Now let's look at oogenesis. Under the influence of FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. It is secreted by what? The pituitary gland, but you don't need to write it here. Oogenesis, under the influence of FSH, diploid cells in the ovary undergo mitosis to form numerous follicles. One undergoes meiosis to form haploid ovum. So let's look at the ovaries. They said it produces progesterone and estrogen. So now we are introduced to a new hormone, FSH, which is secreted by the pituitary gland. And then a diploid cell in the ovary undergoes mitosis to form numerous follicles. And then one of them undergoes meiosis to form haploid ovum, an ovum with 23 chromosomes. Now let's look at puberty. Puberty, that is a period where humans in which they experience physical changes in their bodies in order to be capable of sexual reproduction. So let's look at what happens in males during puberty, stimulated by testosterone. Puberty in males, it's stimulated by testosterone. Start of the production of sperm cells, growth of pubic hair, facial hair, body hair, development of muscles, deepening of the voice. Let's look at puberty in females, stimulated by estrogen, growth of female sex organs, start of the menstrual cycle and production of ova, growth of pubic hair, ova is ovum, growth and development of breasts and widening of the hips. This is simple. Let's move to what we call the menstrual cycle and the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. It means that we're going to talk about what happens in the ovaries during menstrual cycle, what happens in the uterus. Now, the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. There we're talking about the hormones that are involved in menstrual cycle, because the menstrual cycle cannot happen without these hormones, right? So the first thing, what happens? We have a hormone FSH secreted by what? The pituitary gland. It stimulates the development of the follicle, right? A follicle, right, it develops to become a Graafian follicle, right? The FSH stimulates the development of a follicle. That follicle develops to become a Graafian follicle, right? Where? In the ovaries. Now let's look at in the ovaries, day 1 to 7 there, on the menstrual cycle, new follicles develop to secrete estrogen. It means that those follicles are formed, they were stimulated by what? The FSH that comes from the pituitary gland. And then when they are formed, they develop into Graafian follicle, and then they secrete what? Estrogen. We'll talk about the importance of estrogen. Now, as that is happening, as those follicles are happening, what happens in the uterus? They say that the lining breaks down and menstruation is released, right? So it means that that would be your last period. Now we are entering into a new menstrual cycle. A new period is going to start, right? It starts with the follicles developing. Now from day 8 to day 13, mature Graafian follicles develop, right? The Graafian follicles, they move to the edge of the ovaries and they continue to secrete what is called estrogen. Now let's see what that estrogen do to the uterus. Let's look at the side of the uterus. The uterus, estrogen stimulates the endometrium to become thicker and develop more blood vessels and glands. Now in the uterus, the estrogen is going to cause the uterus to become what? To become thicker. Now, what happens now in hormone? Now we're talking about the hormones again. The pituitary gland will release now again what is called luteinizing hormone, LH. Well, LH it stimulates ovulation. Ovulation is stimulated by high levels of FSH and LH on day what? Day 14. And then it stimulates the development of the corpus luteum. So let's look at day 14 there, because we are at day 14 in the ovaries. Then the Graafian follicle, they say it bursts to release an egg. The process is called ovulation. It was caused by what? Let's look at the hormonal of the menstrual cycle. It was caused by the hormone called LH, right? So let's look at what happens after ovulation. Now the Graafian follicle, in the uterus nothing happens, and the Graafian follicles becomes a corpus luteum that secretes progesterone. Now we have what is called a corpus luteum, and then it secretes what? It secretes progesterone. As that Graafian follicle secretes the progesterone. Remember, Graafian follicles, it is formed after what? After the process of ovulation, after the egg enters the fallopian tube. right? Now, the progesterone that is secreted by that Graafian follicle, that corpus luteum, that is formed, it stimulates the endometrium to become even more thicker and develop more blood vessels and glands ready to receive the embryo if an egg cell is fertilized, right? It is ready to receive what? It is ready to receive the embryo if the egg is fertilized in the fallopian tube. Remember, it was released into the fallopian tube. Now, what happens after that? If the fertilization does not take place, the corpus luteum will shrink and stop secreting progesterone. If fertilization takes place, the corpus luteum remains active in the ovary and it continues to secrete progesterone. No more follicles develop in the ovaries, no menstruation takes place if fertilization happens. Now let's look at the functions of estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen, it makes the uterus to become thick, and then we have progesterone. It prepares the endometrium fully for pregnancy. Progesterone, they also say again that it maintains pregnancy. It's a hormone for pregnancy, right? And then remember, we talked about, now we are done, right? Now we're going to talk about, we talked about also FSH and LH. FSH stimulates the development of follicles, and LH stimulates ovulation. It also stimulates the development of that corpus luteum that secretes progesterone. And then if fertilization doesn't happen, it does what? It shrinks and stops secreting that progesterone. So after this, now part 2 is going to be, now what happens if the fertilization takes place. Now then we're going to talk about the development of the embryo, how a child develops in the uterus, what happens. We will have chorion, placenta and everything. But now we know that what happens if the fertilization does not take place. We talked about what happens in the ovaries, right? We talked about the ovulation, the egg bursting and entering into the fallopian tube. So thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I would really appreciate it.